Do a presentation on effective feedback.
Okay, try and get to 5 minutes, here we go. What I'm going to talk about today is something I've just put into my lessons quite recently called critique. It's like a more powerful method of developing feedback in your classroom, and more powerful as well because it actually makes students really act on feedback straight away rather than some of the problems I've noticed, which is I've looked through some of my students' books. I've been very conscious over the last year or so, the more as I get into teaching, that a lot of students which I'm writing comments in their book and say, make sure you change this and do that. If I go back through every single kid's book, I can't say hand on heart that every kid has actually done what I've asked them to do. So I'm giving the feedback to some students. They're not all of them are actually going away and developing what I've asked them to do. So I then started looking at that book, An Ethic of Excellence by Ron Berger. Highly recommend if anyone wants to read it to go for it. So it's a really good book. And he talks about trying to develop the feedback in the classroom and the students' work they create. These are the reasons why I looked at it. Some of the work that students handed in wasn't the best I felt it could be. I always felt they could put a little bit more effort in. Some of it wasn't as how I expected it. Second of all, I also wanted to make sure that the feedback I was giving in my classroom wasn't a set activity. I wasn't going to say, right guys, let's get your stuff out, let's read through feedback, let's adapt it. I wanted it to become the classroom norm that students actually turned around and acted upon feedback because they wanted to themselves. And last of all, I wanted to make sure that everything I'd asked them to do was actually acted on there and then or in the next following learning part of my lesson, so that anything I asked them to do or other students asked them to do was actually getting done. So using critique rather than just giving normal assessment feedback or assessment for learning, that sort of thing, is a much more powerful way. It's not peer assessment, it's not just the fact that you are given an activity, it's, like I said, it's developing that culture in the classroom where students actually take a bit of work, getting some feedback, redesigning it, going back and so on, and moving it up. And it's actually making the feedback part actually the biggest part of learning. From the book, there's a quote which says, if it isn't perfect, it isn't finished, okay? Which is what I've been trying to work with my students. I want my students to get the best possible pieces of work handed in. I want to make sure that whether it's an 8-mark question that we're doing or whether it's an extended bit of writing I'm doing, I want it to be the best piece of work they can do. So I've got a little process that goes through it. Whenever I do critique, I always have a dedicated time in the lesson to do it. Now, in my last unit, which I've just done, I did a cycling project for my GCSE Year 11 students in their theory lessons, and I had 3 dedicated critique lessons where in that lesson it will be about giving feedback, about acting upon that feedback and developing the work they've done. Some people probably say, but that's 3 lessons where you could be teaching them, but actually the process of evaluating other people's work, picking out have they got the content in there, have they got examples in there, have they written it well and that sort of thing, actually drives the content in my lessons. So it wasn't taken away from content, they're actually probably learning more because they've got the real life examples and the work in front of them. The way I do it, or the way that the book tells you to do it, is first of all, whatever bit of work you're doing, model that bit of work. So I was getting my students to write some cycling articles, so the first thing we did is we got some articles in and we looked through it and pulled out key vocabulary, and we had some journalists come in as well and actually looked at what a good article and newspaper article would do. And the key vocabulary was things like get rid of redundant words, make sure the first paragraph has got the who, where, what, when, how, why. So the experts were giving us this key vocabulary and we were seeing it as we were unpicking it. With that, we then created success criteria. And the students then said, well, a good bit of article writing needs to have this, this, this and this. So they actually had a criteria that we're going to work towards. I then got my students to go off and make their first draft. And I didn't say, right, go off and write your first article. I call it draft. I call it draft for a reason, because the word means obviously that what you bring back is going to be amended, it's going to be developed, it's going to be unpicked, and it's going to obviously have to be redone again. When they bring their first draft in, I then did a formal class critique, but I, with one person's work, got in front of the class and I unpicked it and I showed them using the key vocabulary and the success criteria what we're looking for, what was missing, what needs to be done a little bit better, okay? And then I got students to critique each other's work and do that, and then obviously they went off and did their second draft, brought it back, we critiqued it again, did their third draft until we had their final bit of work, which we displayed at an exhibition a couple of weeks ago, and the work was phenomenal. It was really, really good, much higher than I'd expected it to ever been, which is brilliant. There is a bit of a cycle of drafting it, critiquing it, redrafting it, critiquing it, but every time that work develops, and if I had time to show you the work, I've got all their versions, okay, and from 1 to 3, the work they did just got better and better and better, which is really, really good. Also by doing this method, it's not just the content you're reinforcing, but they were learning how to write better, and they were learning how to develop their extended writing and things like that. So you also learn processes. So whatever it is you're doing, whether it's art, a piece of work, whether it's writing, it actually reinforces not just the content, but the process. These are 3 rules, and obviously just another one at the bottom there for giving effective critique. First of all, be kind. In my classroom, I said that we're helping each other try and develop their work. It's not that you are trying to be, oh, have you seen Sean's work, this is stupid, and that sort of thing, hold around the room. It was trying to get into that culture. There's no sarcasm. The feedback there is help develop individuals, okay? Develop individuals' piece of work, not the individual. So everything actually, after a couple of sessions, actually became very focused just on the work, and there's no comments about people. There's no comments like, it's good, or I like it, they just waste your time. So I actually banned them. I had a banned list of words when they were given their critique they couldn't use. And we actually used the vocab. I said, don't use like it's good or it's bad. Use the vocab that we learned about the who, what, where, how, when, why, about the redundant words when we looked at our model, and use them in there. And it really, really works. I've got a little quote from the book that goes here about being specific, and it says, to use a metaphor I learned, if we picture our critique as surgically dissecting a piece of work to improve it, our vocabulary is our kit of surgical tools. If we only have words like it's good or it's bad, we're trying to do surgery with a meat cleaver. If we want to dissect the work carefully and put it back together well, we need a precise kit of tools. And that's where I've got my students to be really specific. If they said something needed adapting, I said, well, where, what, how, what needed adapting? And it became like a set of instructions that went back. And lastly, it was about being helpful. Any sort of critique that the students were giving each other had to be helpful. You know, if it wasn't going to make that piece of work or the learning of our class better, I said, don't use it, okay? So everything had to be right there to think about, had to obviously benefit the work they were doing. And lastly, just sort of like the mantra, hard on content, soft on people. I didn't really ask students to talk about Sean's bit of work was this, we just talked about the work as well, and actually just looked at it. There's 2 different types of critique you can do, which I've used, both of them. First one is an in-depth critique. On my little schedule, on the first critique session, I led it myself, okay, and I showed this is what we're going to do, and I focused on one element at a time, and then students then critiqued each other's work, and then I went back and said, look, we need to do this now, can you find evidence of this in their work? And they went and give critique back, okay, and they made lots of notes down here, and I really challenged how specific these were, and said, well, where? You're asking someone to do it, but where do you want them to do it? How do you want them to do it? And that sort of thing. So that in-depth critique in our lesson was really, really good, and they learnt from the model from me how to do it effectively. And every time I do a new bit of work, I'd obviously do it again, because no one bit of work is the same. The other version I've tried as well, this isn't me, but it's called gallery critique, and you can stick the bits of work up in your room, and then the students come in, this is when they're more confident in it, and then with cork boards or post-it notes underneath the work, they can actually then go around and give comments and that sort of thing, and say what's well, what needs to be done better, kind, specific, helpful feedback. And again, you get to focus on things. So just ask the students to look at the first one, the first paragraph. Can you give some feedback on that, and so on. So why did I do it? What was the impact? The standard went through the roof. The work which they finished, the final bit after this process of critique, draft, critique, and so on, was exceptional. Everything was specific. Became a set of instructions. Progress was extremely high from first to the end. Content was learnt and reinforced through the process. They learnt the literacy skills, because obviously we learnt about the way of doing it. At the end, students were actually critiquing without me even saying, it's a critique lesson. They were saying, can you read my work please, to another member of the class, which is the culture I was trying to get. Skilled enough to themselves, Nicole Dollery constantly just kept rereading her work, redrafting it, which is excellent. Her presentation was phenomenal. And again, they created this bit of work that they were proud of, and because it was a draft and it had to get better and better and better, they ended up with an excellent piece of work. I really recommend getting that book at the library when they finally give it back. Okay?
Right.
But there we go.
Thanks. Good people.